Welcome again on behalf of the American Psychological Foundation, and thank you for joining us for this special event. I'm Dr. Michelle Quist-Ryder, the CEO of APF, and if you would like to turn on live captioning for this event, instructions will appear in the chat. So with the growing challenges facing both the LGBTQIA+ and the scientific research communities, the need for connection and support has never been more critical than it is right now. We are grateful for your presence today as we come together to explore how psychology can uplift the queer community, as well as the clinicians and researchers who support them. At APF, we believe strongly that psychological knowledge is the key to improving life and ensuring a world where all people are healthy, happy, and living with dignity. We're dedicated to serving marginalized communities, ending prejudice and stigma, preventing violence, and addressing the connections between mental and physical health. Through initiatives like the Franklyn Springfield Awareness Fund, which is making today possible, APF is dedicated to funding efforts to disseminate information to combat stigma and discrimination against the LGBTQIA+ community. So thank you again for joining us today for this important conversation. I'm so pleased now to hand things over to our moderator for this evening, APF trustee and longtime advocate for the community, Dr. Doug Haldeman.
Thank you, Michelle. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to share a little bit about myself as your moderator. As Michelle said, I'm Doug Haldeman. I'm an APF trustee and a longtime advocate and activist for queer rights. I'm a licensed psychologist and the immediate past chair of the doctoral program in clinical psychology at John F. Kennedy University in Pleasant Hill, California. Much of my scholarly publication encompasses the competent and ethical treatment of LGBT and other marginalized groups, and the relationship between politics, culture, and mental health, as well as linguistic diversities for marginalized groups. I have lectured on these and other topics all over the world, and currently serve on the board of an international LGBT relief organization for asylum seekers called Rainbow Street. And I am very, very happy to be here with all of you this afternoon or tonight, depending on where you are in the country. This evening's town hall will begin with a roundtable discussion featuring questions for the panel. Following that, we will open the floor for an audience Q&A. As we proceed through the conversation, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A feature, the chat that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible in the last part of the program, and we'll be sharing resources and information in the chat throughout the event as well. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce today's panelists. Sean Ebony Coleman is the founder and CEO of Destination Tomorrow, a national LGBTQ organization with centers located in the South Bronx, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. Destination Tomorrow serves the community through educational, financial, housing, health, and personal support programs. The grassroots organization puts an emphasis on providing support to vulnerable members of the queer community that takes them off the path of requiring emergency care, focusing on economic, social, and mental empowerment on a holistic level. As a nationally recognized leader in the transgender community and the first African American of transgender experience to operate an LGBTQ center in the state of New York, Sean plays a key role in advocating for policies that directly impact the lives of millions of LGBTQ individuals. Through Gilead Sciences' Transcend Community Impact Fund, Sean is the only Black trans grant maker in the country, providing crucial funding to transgender and gender non-conforming-led grassroots organizations nationally. Sean is also the founder and managing partner of Sean Ebony Coleman Consulting, where he has worked with companies including Unilever, Lululemon, and Equinox on campaigns and DEI strategies to support the queer community. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you so much, Doug, for having me. I appreciate you.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. Excuse me. Dr. Sarah Bergamy is the founder of Phoenix Rise, a private practice in Denver, Colorado, with specialty offerings in identity development, sexual minority competency, as well as transgender and gender diverse identities in adults, adolescents, and children. She has provided presentations and hearings in diverse professional, educational, and healthcare settings, both on a local and national level, as well as in the public and private community and professional sectors for organizations such as Big Brothers Big Sisters, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and Google. She has previously served as a representative of the Society for the for the Psychology of Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, Gender Diversity, I should know this better. It's Division 44 of the American Psychological Association, Council of Representatives, and previously served as a member and chair of the APA Committee on Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity. She is a past president of the Colorado Psychological Association and helped co-found the Multidisciplinary Gender Diversity Center at Children's Hospital Colorado, the True Center. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Doug. And yes, I still trip over the Division 44 full name. It's just a lot of syllables, but thank you for having me.
Well, you know, we've changed it so many times. I am always trying to remember what's the latest version. Let me move on now to Dr. Derek Phillips. Derek is a board-certified medical psychologist and a clinical neuropsychologist and prescribing psychologist in the Department of Psychiatry at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health Center in Central Illinois. He has been executive director of the APA-designated Masters of Science in Clinical Psychopharmacology program at Farley Dickinson University since 2020, where he also teaches in the APA-accredited Clinical Psychology PhD program. He currently serves as an APF trustee and as chair of the Franklyn Springfield Committee, which aims to reduce stigma and discrimination against the queer community through the dissemination of psychological research. Dr. Phillips has had extensive involvement with the American Psychological Association, including serving on the Council of Representatives and serving in a variety of leadership roles in both APA and various divisions. Dr. Phillips is a former member of the APA Council of Representatives, past chair of the APA Board of Convention Affairs, past president of Division 55, which is the Society for Prescribing Psychology, and past president of the Illinois Psychological Association. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks, Doug. Really happy to be here.
Thank you all again for joining us today. I'd like to kick us off with a practical question for all of our panelists. It seems as if there's a new crisis facing us constantly right now, every day. What's your go-to grounding technique for yourself or for your clients and your patients?
I don't know how we're all going to handle the popcorning in and out, so I'm just going to start talking. Not that I suggest that everybody needs to do this, but I had a baby about 10 months ago, and he is incredibly effective at keeping me grounded. So I don't necessarily recommend everybody run and get you a kid, but I think there's a lesson there, which, you know, my go-to honestly is, you know, anything that brings me into the present. I mean, I think I'm a true mindfulness follower when it comes to trying to bring my nervous system activation down and get my busy brain to calm down a little bit. And that, you know, springtime is actually spot on perfect because there's something changing all the time, tuning into, you know, the buds on my trees, or I took a dog walk before this event just to notice what my dog's doing, or literally smelling the flowers. So It's not very riveting or novel, but that is truly one of my go-to grounding techniques.
Mine is like just stillness, just sitting still, right? I try to remind myself every morning to center myself and then to be intentional with my day, knowing that I can't predict how the day is going to go, but that I can be calm we have a saying here at Destination Tomorrow, we pivot, we don't panic, right? So in the morning, it's about reminding myself that I have to pivot. And then it's also about staying in the audience, right? Some things have absolutely nothing to do with me. They may have absolutely nothing to do with the task at hand, and just reminding myself to stay in the audience. And then lastly, to like celebrate every moment of joy that you can. It can be those small moments of joy, but just like to embrace it. Oftentimes we're so critical of ourselves, especially now. So just reminding myself to live in the moment and spending time with my family. And Sarah, congratulations. My wife is also pregnant. She's 4.5 months pregnant.
Wow.
So like staying centered in that and realizing that I'm gonna be an old dad. I don't mean that being funny, but that I'm gonna be the old guy in the playground now. And it keeps me centered. It keeps me focused on what my ultimate purpose is. And it's to like live a fruitful life for my family and as an example for my community.
Yeah,
Right.
I 100% agree. For me, it's also very much, at least part of it is very much family related. I have 3 nieces and 2 nephews that are 10 and under. So if I'm having a day where I'm very caught up here and with all of the tumult that's happening in the country, FaceTiming them, going to see them in person very quickly also brings me to the present because, I get to get lost in their wonderful world for just a little bit. And also reminds me that in addition to being a psychologist and an advocate and an activist, that I'm also an uncle, and that, that's just as important, if not a more important role. And so that's really important for me. I also, even though, this can't happen all the time, traveling is definitely really important to me to be grounded, especially if I'm going somewhere that, is really beautiful nature wise, so I can really focus on that. And like Sean said, just be still and just, take everything in a world where everything is so fast and really chaotic at this point. Just doing that is very powerful.
Thanks, Derek. Sarah, your practice includes specialties in gender affirming and gender identity care. How are you navigating continuing to protect and advocate for your clients while hostility against the community continues to rise? What tangible steps have you been able to take to preserve this important area or practice?
Ooh, that's like the mega question, Doug. I've been, I'm gonna break the mystique of what we're doing here. This isn't the first time I heard the question, so I actually have been giving it some thought. And when I first read it, I actually thought, I don't know. I was like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how I'm handling it. And I thought, well, that's not going to be helpful in a town hall where people are, ostensibly hoping that, maybe one of us will have one little nugget that will, carry us through the day. Or maybe people are just happy to be here in community. I know that for me, that's just as powerful. But then I had to really sit with it and think, there are tangible things. Now, one of them I think is not going to be obviously the same for everybody. I happen to live in a state where being aware of my state protections around gender affirming care are very strong and are continuing to get reified, which is unique in a lot of our country right now. So I want to own that I am sitting in Denver, Colorado, and being here is very different than being in another state, in another city, in another town.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I've certainly really, even with that intact, in the last few months, have had experiences as a provider that I don't usually have. So I'm actually really good at hearing the crisis and being like, hang on, like, I think we can weather it. And I caught myself getting kind of swept up a bit, and reacting a lot, which I don't think is a problem. I don't think it's a problem to react. I mean, we're emotional, and when something happens and somebody starts persecuting people I care about, whether it's personally, professionally, or otherwise, it's going to get my hackles up immediately. But I found myself just getting really pissed off, to be frank. And then my kid needed something, and I got a break. But I think what it taught me was a few things that I was using for myself. I started using with my clients, and one of those was, the simple statement of, first and foremost, we're going to guard our joy. So I appreciated Sean bringing that up. I actually said, what can you do to guard your joy? And if people looked at me like, what joy? We would spend some time saying, we need to really put thought to that, because being a psychologist, I know we're getting into that, fight, flight, or freeze brain, because we're getting so activated by so many attacks, and that's completely normal and appropriate. So I also validate. That's a very tangible step, is like validate, like don't skip it. Right? Like, don't skip the step of validating somebody's experience when, I've got folks right now that will say to me, I think I sound crazy. Now, I know I'm in private practice. It's not the first time I've heard that, but they really mean, like, do I sound paranoid? And given what's happening in the country right now, I said, no. I just answered the question. I said, no, I realize that in listening to yourself, being very worried, very scared, that you think you sound like out of bounds frightened. And I'm here to say, like, I don't think so. I think what we need to look at is how to take care of you. So another thing I do is I go back to our scientific base. I go back to what we know. I go back to our wisdom. And when I say our wisdom, I mean as a community, not just a psychological family. And so that's a huge one for me, is to go back to not only all the good science we do have as psychologists, and that's still intact. I mean, I have caught myself saying to parents, to kids, adolescents, adults, listen, nothing that's happening changes what we know. Like, it doesn't change what we know. And that's what I'm operating from. And that's where we're going to be, is we know that gender diversity exists. We know that it's beautiful. We also know it's powerful, and it historically has frightened people. So I bring all that up because I'm like, beauty sometimes scares people. And then the other part of the wisdom is going to our history. It's really going back into, the history of where we've been as a profession, and then where we've been as a people. And what I mean by that is really emphasizing the resilience that we've seen for eons, and resilience that we didn't want to have to build. But I caught myself in an interview with a media outlet saying, I think being a mid-career psychologist, by the way, Sean, I'm going to be the old parent at the playground too. So we should go find a playground together where everybody can think we're the grandparents. But I really caught myself saying, I hate to say it, but some of this feels familiar, like really familiar. And if people are going to try to take away or put challenges to giving gender affirming care, I said, you know what, we've been there before too. And I don't want to be there, but I've lived through that one time. And so it's sort of almost like the playbook was still there. So those are just a few things. I mean, I could probably drone on and on, but there's three of us, and I'd like to obviously not take up all the air. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Sarah. Sean, this next question for you. Destination Tomorrow offers comprehensive support in a variety of areas, including healthcare, housing, economic assistance, and more. Can you share a bit about how inequality and discrimination in these areas compound mental health difficulties for the community? How can psychology incorporate considerations for these factors in treatment and in advocacy efforts?
Thank you, Doug, for the question.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. The thing about power and privilege is that it's very much relational, right? If you're a gay white man from a wealthy family, the privileges you enjoy because of your race, your class, your gender identity, outside of your queerness, it can protect you in some ways. But that's not the reality for many of the clients we serve. They're not only part of the LGBTQ community, they're also Black and brown and experiencing the worst levels of poverty and possibly physical illnesses. Their compounded identities make it that much harder for them to be viable, visible, to seek care, and to be taken seriously. when you're doing everything you possibly can to keep yourself and your family alive, but you're facing unnecessary bureaucracy because of your race and gender and the classes biases at every turn, your mental health, of course, is going to suffer. Our DT clients are some of the most resilient people I've ever met. But the thing is, we shouldn't have to be so resilient, right? We shouldn't have to be put through the ringer just in order to prove how strong we are. And we shouldn't have to be on fight or flight mode. And these last couple of months, I can't speak for the entire community, but me as a Black trans 57-year-old, they call me a senior. I say I'm seasoned. It's put me through the ringer. And I've already shared what my coping mechanisms are, right? So it becomes even more challenging to show up and be the strength. I think what we have to realize is recognize those barriers I just laid out and develop and design programs and messaging that kind of directly speak to that, and then advocate on behalf of communities that oftentimes don't get in these rooms to advocate on their own behalf. Hopefully that made sense.
Sorry. Opening it back up, thank you, Sean. Opening it back up to all of our panelists, what are direct ways to support strength and resilience in queer communities, particularly trans clients in hostile environments? That's for anybody.
Can I just say show up? Right. Oftentimes we don't get an opportunity to meet a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and we don't have access to these spaces. In some ways, we're intimidated by these spaces. Just show up. And it doesn't have to be in a professional capacity, right? It could be a relationship building. I want to get to know you. I want to understand your lived experience. I want to understand what's happening in your space. And hopefully you get an opportunity to be vulnerable enough to share with me some of the things that can then inform what it is that I'm going to do in my practice. But I just really need you to show up.
Great.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this is not a new playbook. It's if you can be visible, if you can be heard, then do it, right? And that's a big if. I think now more than ever. And I can also share. I mean, I've had thoughts recently that I don't usually. People that know me know I don't tend to be very well. Let's see here, quiet. So I also have a lot of words in my body. But I have a tendency to speak out and just say things I think and feel, and I try to do it in an elegant way. But I caught myself starting to feel concerned about being targeted. And this is, I'm saying all this within just so many layers of really insulated privilege that I've had for years and years as a white person, as somebody with a doctorate education, where I even live in the city. I mean, anything I can think of, I have a lot of protections in community. And I started really thinking, whoa, and I'm sure some of this is a product of being a parent. I've got a whole new worry bone that I grew. But I still think that's what Sean said is true. It's show up, and especially show up if you're allied. Show up. I think one of the things I've heard from a lot of people is they feel abandoned. I think some of the shock and awe that has been going on with, all of the terrible, really, really, truly hateful things that have been happening, is a lot of people are so stunned or so sort of just, in their nervous system that they're frozen. They just, they care, but they're frozen. Or they care, but they're like, ooh, it feels uncomfortable. Whereas I used to like having my rainbow sign in the yard, even if we have nobody in the family that happens to be part of the rainbow. And all of a sudden people were like, maybe I'll just kind of quietly go back inside. And so, I think that's critical. I think it's absolutely critical, especially, I mean, here I am in Colorado, is to show up for people that are not protected. Right. And I'll just quickly, there was a Q&A that I noticed that was specifically asking about, do I worry, for instance, about providing gender affirming care and possibly being prosecuted from another state if I see, I serve somebody who comes from out of state here. It does turn out that Colorado does have protections in that arena that they will not play nice, essentially, with subpoenas or anything that's trying to interfere with us providing gender affirming care. So again, I'm super insulated here in Colorado, which is why I think it's even more important that those of us who are in protected spaces to be even more outspoken and stand in that power even more so.
Yeah, I also, you know, I'm in Illinois. It's also a pretty insulated state, like Colorado is. There's a lot of state protections as well. And although I completely agree that showing up is the most important thing, to put everything into action, I also think that talking about it like we are is also really important too. We can't be quiet. We can't just stop talking about all of the things that are happening, because I sincerely believe that one of the strategies is just to desensitize. You know, there's constant chaos, constant, you know, announcements coming down about, you know, a myriad of different things that are all, you know, at least in my opinion, terrible. And so I think it's really easy to become desensitized to that, and like, oh yeah, that's just another one. It's just another one. And so I think the potential is to stop talking about it, to stop thinking that these things are important, and we can't kind of fall victim to that. But then on top of that, showing up, like Sean and Sarah talked about, we need both of those things.
But if I can just jump in, Derek, I definitely agree with you about talking about it. But I think for too long we've talked about it in these silos. So the folks that honestly need to get the message, we have no idea what these discussions are about or are like, and how we can contribute to them. So yes, let's talk about it, but let's figure out ways to include folks that haven't historically been included in those discussions.
100%, Sean. You know, that I completely agree. That's something that we haven't done a good job of in the past. A lot of people haven't done a good job of in the past, but including psychology. So yes, that is absolutely a requirement for doing this.
I also was, you know, thinking, going back to Sean's observation about the varying levels of power and privilege and how that affects a crisis time like this right now, because I think it was made clear from day one of the current administration that trans individuals were the very first target. You know, that executive order to essentially you know, not just devalue, but sort of erase trans identity in general, I thought was absolutely infuriating. And that's when I started to think, this is going to be worse than we thought. This is really going to be worse than we thought. And as a white gay man who lives in arguably one of the most liberal areas in the country, in San Francisco, I really feel that the important thing is to try any way possible to use that privilege for good. Because when I think about what it must be like to be a young trans person living in the middle of Wyoming or someplace that isn't quite so hospitable to diverse people, I think this is really a life-threatening situation. We all know the research. We all know that living in an inhospitable social climate and or with rejection from family or from a community increases significantly the likelihood of suicidality. And it is, I think, important. I mean, so I, of course, agree with everything that the three of you have been saying here, but I think we need to really be proactive in looking for opportunities to show up and to be public and to present ourselves as voices for inclusivity and for tolerance, and to say no. You know, tossing DEI stuff out of all of our policies and corporations or whatnot is wrong and will hurt people. And, isn't the role of government supposed to be to help us and protect us, not to harm us? So those are some of the thoughts I have about this current situation we're in. Sorry for fumbling with this. I'm supposed to ask another question, which is, for all of you, how do we capacity build and support and expand safe community spaces, both online and in person, whether informally or through evidence-based group support or therapy efforts? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything all that novel, to be honest. Just going to prepare you, I guess, to be not impressed. No, a lot of what I have been sort of focused on is to keep on keeping on. And so one of my passion areas is training. It's training and training and training and training and talking to whoever will listen. And so I do think the capacity building part is continuing to share competency, right? Is continuing to march forward with making sure that, especially our folks that are coming up through their education to be, psychologists, therapists, community builders are learning about, the richness of our communities, about our history, making sure our communities know our history. I know I'm really like banging that gong, but I just think you need to learn it and you need to highlight it, right? Like that's a lot of what's going on right now is this attempted erasure. And I've been saying over and over to anybody that'll listen, like just because somebody comes along and tries to say the world's flat doesn't make it any less round. Gender diversity exists, like sexual orientation diversity exists, like the breadth of diversity of human beings exists. I don't care if somebody wants to toss out the acronym, I'm still going to operate from the same good, like, it's evidence-based. It's just. I mean, I'm gonna still operate from this compass. It's our ethical compass. I mean, I still feel like I have all of the same support and justification for the way that sort of I operate as a professional and the way I operate as a queer person. And again, because I do have some protection, it's even more important that I show up with that. But yeah, I think the capacity building, Doug, to me is those of us who need to make sure that we're educating and doing it in a way that's accessible, that can be, that it's not happening in a silo, as Sean pointed out. I mean, so often we just do this in closed rooms, quietly in our echo chambers. So I'm just a big, big fan of, even if it's, I hate to say it, but even if it's at the dining room table and you're talking to somebody you just met. Just coming at it also with a source of joy. I mean, I like to really celebrate the beauty of our community and highlight it, because I think it's really hard for somebody to stay in a position of hatefulness when I'm just so busy, like, being joyful and jovial about it. And hopefully if you can charm people, that really helps.
Thank you.
I think making sure, let me take a step back, that we all understand representation matters, right? Even in doing capacity building, representation matters. So making sure that whatever instruments you're using, all of it is as diverse as the community that you're looking to serve, and that it's culturally competent, right? I have so many folks that want to come in and do work with Destination Tomorrow, but we speak different languages, if that makes sense. So it's hard to engage someone who kind of doesn't understand where you're coming from, even though you're saying what they need to hear. So I think the first thing has to be making sure that whatever capacity trainings we're putting in place are also as diverse as we need them to be so that we get our message across. It's kind of like still being in that silo if we're not creating dialogue, whether that's training materials or internships or whatever it looks like, if it doesn't meet the population where it is. And in my case, again, it's my Black and brown marginalized folks who may not understand some of the fancy language, but they understand what they're feeling. So how do we make sure the way we're training them is a way that they can receive and kind of replicate. Like we're going to give them these coping skills and coping models so that they can go back in and provide that for the community. So we just want to make sure that we're speaking the same language.
Thanks, Sean. Anything else? Okay. Derek, let me move on to you. You work within a hospital system. How do you navigate this environment and the preemptive compliance we're seeing with discriminatory practices among many organizations? Yeah, including APA.
Well, working in a hospital is kind of a beast of its own. There's layers and layers of bureaucracy and hierarchy. You know, some really necessary, some not, at least in my opinion. I think the way that I've handled this, really even before the current times that we're in, I just try to be involved and available, and also try to make sure that the hospital system sees me as indispensable, you know, with whatever services I'm offering, both the clinical services I'm offering, but also potentially other ways that that I can show that that I have something to offer to the system that can help them overall. So, you know, the system I work with is fairly young, and it's in a pretty rural area of Illinois, and I am the only psychologist here. Now, there are many other mental health professionals. We have psychiatrists, social workers, counselors. So I'm not the only mental health professional, but I am the only psychologist. And I've been here almost 8 years. And so it's been a lot of education really from the beginning. And so what I've done through all that time is just kind of infuse with the education I'm doing with you know, with what my scope of practice is and how you bill for me, is also trying to infuse in how what the hospital can do to be more inclusive. Because again, this is a pretty conservative area in a pretty liberal state. So it's you know, the area that I'm in is definitely very conservative, but they operate with a state government that's very liberal. And so there are a lot of different things. Now, thankfully, the hospital has been very receptive. And I don't think this will be surprising to anyone, but the reason that I initially kind of got heard was our previous CEO had a gay son. And it was really once I made that connection and spoke with him, you know, privately and personally, that I think I really got that across. And I think that even in these times, you know, I know that I, by myself, am not going to be able to stop the hospital system from making a decision, like if they're going to lose federal funds, like lose Medicare funds or Medicaid funds, because, you know, that would bring their services to a halt. But I still can advocate for, you know, possible ways they can push back, or ways that they can work even at the state level, because they are probably going to be saying that to more friendly ears. So, you know, there's not just one way. There's definitely not a magic way. And I'm just one person. So I do my best to navigate these waters. But it, you know, even though it is a younger and smaller hospital, there's still a lot of layers, and a lot of places that I would really like to see, you know, DEI type things really more infused throughout the organization. Thankfully, we already have some of those in place. So that's good. And at least so far, I haven't seen a lot of direct impact for the hospital from the policies that have been decided by the administration.
Okay. Thanks, Derek.
Absolutely.
Sean, we know that for trans and queer communities, especially trans and queer communities of color, there tends to be justified yet significant hesitation when it comes to seeking mental health support. What do you think the psychological community can do to earn a greater sense of trust among trans and queer folk, especially trans and queer people of color?
I think the first and most important thing is to acknowledge the history of state-sanctioned violence against women, people of color, and they've labeled trans people crazy. They continue to label trans people as crazy and delusional and those things. And I think the first approach needs to be to acknowledge that that's historically across the board how that has played out. I think the second thing is to also recognize that in most Black and brown families, we're not taught to seek out therapy and speak about the things and traumas. Most of us don't even realize that we've been traumatized, right?
Mm-hmm.
You become so accustomed to dealing with things, and you get your own coping mechanisms, regardless of what they are. That you believe that you're functioning normally. And I think we have to recognize that that in and of itself is the trauma, whether it's childhood traumas or whatever, and acknowledge them and find ways to bring us into these discussions, right? You can never, my grandmother told me, what happens in this house stays in this house, right? You don't talk about what's going on in this household. So as a grown-up that now needs to kind of unpack some of the things that happened in the house, how do I do that going against what my grandmother taught me, right? So I think you have to recognize that you're kind of up against all of this learned behavior that wasn't ours, that our parents and grandparents kind of tossed at us, and now we have to figure out how to unpack it. So there's a trust level, because you can't tell me what they told me was false unless you can tell me that, and then provide some proof of how it's impacted me and what I can do to unpack it. And then I think the other thing is, there needs to be more of us in those spaces, right? Particularly Black and brown folks, but also trans folks. I've been trying to find a Black trans therapist for our clients up here because they understand the lived experience. And that's not to say that anybody couldn't learn the lived experience, but it's just something about walking into a room to have these discussions and the person looks like you. So you almost feel like you understand where I'm coming from. We can have this discussion and I can be a bit more vulnerable. It's intimidating. I'm not a doctor, right? So in this moment, I'm a bit intimidated because I have all these doctors in me and I don't know what I'm going to say. And I don't want them to think that I'm crazy or think that there's something uniquely wrong with me other than what these people are telling me is wrong with me. So I think we have to really, really be honest with ourselves. And especially in this moment, honesty is necessary, right? Because there are so many within our own community that don't believe trans people should have the rights that we're fighting for. They are willing to toss us away. Me sitting with that, it's disheartening because I do so much work for the community. So to know that the community feels like I'm disposable. How do you work with someone to make them understand that that's not the reality of it? That's not what all of the therapists believe. Let's again, we need to get to know each other so that we understand what we're saying to each other. That was a long-winded response, but
well, one that I'd like to follow up on, Sean, if you don't mind, and that is kind of in the same vein, which is, what do you think the most common barriers are that trans folk of color face when they're seeking effective and affirming mental health care?
When we finally get to the point that we want to seek mental health care, we can't afford it. Like, I pay out of pocket to see my therapist. I give her $250 every week. I think I'm in a place that I I'm investing in my own mental health and wellness, and I understand how important it is. So I prioritize that $250 every week. Some of us can't do that.
Right.
So if we need a sliding scale, that the mental health care needs to be more affordable, especially in light of the fact that they're trying to erase us one, but remove those safety nets that are in place. Medicaid may have taken care of it through one of your managed care plans. That's out the window now. So if you've already started with the therapy based on what you were receiving from Medicaid and you don't receive it anymore, how do you continue care? So I think the first thing is going to be finances, making sure that folks can afford it. And then the second thing is, how do we find you? Right? So I got the money. I know I need it. I don't know how to find you. So I think those are the three things that I would say would be necessary now, those necessary next steps.
Thanks, Sean. Those are really, I think, very helpful insights. Sarah, based on your experiences, how can psychologists and other mental health professionals bring their unique expertise into advocacy efforts to help drive systemic change?
You may hear a little singing in the background, just my kids getting entertained. So sorry as I unmute, there's sometimes song in the house. I mean, Doug, I almost have trouble answering the question, and I think it's in part because I think advocacy like runs in my circulatory system. So sometimes it's like when you've been doing something and you didn't know you were doing it, you're sort of like, how do I do that thing I didn't know I was doing? I mean, I think there's some practical ways, obviously, where, as much as it can feel like beating our heads against the wall, sometimes it's showing up in your state legislature and testifying. I mean, it's actually like going on record with evidence that, evidence and data and experience that you may have as a practitioner, but that I trust. There's a lot of good information out there. And I will say, I lean on a lot of policy documents and things that we've collected in APA to be able to bring all that evidence to the table. And sometimes we do that knowing that we're talking almost into the wind, that, we're going to advocate and it's not going to yield the result we want. And I do think there's some, a need for us as psychologists and as mental health people to also educate each other on how advocacy doesn't always mean getting the end goal, right? It doesn't always mean that you go and you advocate and then you get the thing that you were looking for. And, I'm sure for some people, they're like, well, duh, Sarah, I already knew that. I think again, when you're insulated in layers of different kinds of privilege, sometimes you really, you live in this magical world where you think, well, as long as I tell people what the data says, they should listen and then they should do things accordingly. Mm-hmm. And so I know, at least for me, I had to learn that sometimes showing up and saying all the things that are absolutely correct and true doesn't get you that end result of the bill you wanted to pass or the protections that you wanted to have happen. Mm-hmm. But what it does do is it builds a record of being there. So you get the show up piece. It also, people hear you. I mean, I work a lot with kids and with minors and people that don't even have political power technically, like they don't have the right to vote. They don't feel like, they feel like people are just doing things to them and they don't have a way to go on their own behalf and cast the vote and try to actualize what they want to see in the world. And so what I learned is how important it was when I was sitting in a testimony room at the Capitol and looking next to me and there's a 9-year-old. I'm like, the 9-year-old needs to hear this, needs to hear the positive pieces because the 9-year-old doesn't know some of this is a game. And I do say it like that. It's like this gamemanship thing that happens. But I think a lot of folks that are just experiencing the onslaught of targeting don't realize that there's this ugly thing happening sometimes where people are shifting and playing a game at somebody else's expense. So to me, advocacy is about, again, I think I'm just being repetitive. It's the showing up. It's speaking truth to power. It's bringing our evidence. It's bringing our know-how. It's bringing our experience, our history, our magic to the table and letting it be seen and letting it be known. And that may take place in the Capitol, or that may be because I'm on an airplane and somebody says, what do you do for a living? And I don't dodge the question.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other thoughts on that? Well, let me move on. Each of you not only work with the queer community, but are members of the community yourselves. How do you navigate compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout as your personal and professional identities overlap and new challenges arise every day?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that I struggle with this, like, and I have been struggling with this. Uh, Man, if there were ever a time that I wish that being a psychologist made me immune from these things, I wished it recently, but it absolutely is not the case. I I think that you know, if we kind of go back to one of the first questions that we had, what are our grounding techniques? So yes, probably a little repetitive, but I think that I can't directly control a lot of these things. I can't directly control the issues that my patients are going to be bringing to me, and so if they are also battling trauma and battling you know for their own livelihoods, for their rights, all of these things that we hold so dear, that we can't really separate and say, well, that's just a policy issue. Well, it's a policy issue for you, and for me it's my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really difficult to compartmentalize that. I think we do the best we can to do that so that we can help the person in front of us, but it is difficult. And all I can say is that how I navigate it is I just try to take care of myself as much as possible. Sean, bravely said that he's in his own therapy, and I think that's extremely important for psychologists too, to be in our own personal therapy, especially right now when we are basically under attack by our own government. So I think that we also have to talk to each other. That's why this setting is so important and powerful, that we're having this event where we're able to talk through these things and hear from our colleagues, hear from our fellow community members, and just remind ourselves that we're not alone. We actually have a lot of numbers, we have big numbers, and that we're all probably struggling right now.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, I was thinking about how I'm used to sort of existing in what I see as an accurate world where diversity's the rule and not the exception, and all the efforts to not only erase diversity in general, but also to box everything back in. I think we've spent all this time as a community trying to educate that the boundaries that have come from power dynamics that precede us to put us in finite groups, or say there's only 2 categories of this and there's only 3 of that. I actually caught myself finally realizing the other day. I went, my very existence doesn't agree with that, and my androgyny in the world doesn't agree with that. What am I going to do about bathrooms again? Because I was already navigating them in a socially uncomfortable way, but now I'm worried about safety again. And I thought, oh, that really came home to roost again. And I hadn't really stopped to think about it again. Privilege over here. I was like, going through my world in Colorado going, I'm good. Everything, I'll be okay. And so I like Derek said, I think it's important to spend some time really acknowledging that it's happening. So I will say this: I think it's healthy to cry. Mm-hmm. So I have cried with family and friends. I've made sure to tell people when I feel afraid. I've sought that person just to give me a hug, so that I can show up in my space as hopefully a healer and hold space. And so more important than ever, it's don't try to be impenetrable. Don't try to think that just because you have diplomas or because you have a lifetime of experience and it's weathered you, that you are going to hold this and just show up for people. I think we all know we have cracks. And so it's back to community. And I agree. I was really looking forward to this event tonight. I mean, it's a shame in a way I can't see all the people that are attending, because it helps to know you're there. But I do love to see people and hear people and just feel that influx of just goodness and beauty.
Thank you, Sarah.
I've struggled with this question, right? As the Black trans leader, so many people were coming to me like, "What are we gonna do?" And and they expected answers from me at a time that I don't think I had even processed what was happening, right? And then processed how it was going to play out in my life. And Sarah, thank you for introducing bathrooms. You see what I did there? But for but for bringing the bathroom issue up, because I hadn't thought about, okay, I'm going to be in public. What bathroom am I going to use? Am I in danger if I travel and go into the wrong bathroom, right? And then being like this and walking into the restroom assigned at birth, it's like, this is really getting ready to be hilarious. So like me allowing myself to take the time to process all of those emotions that I was feeling, and then also being honest with the folks, whether it was my staff or my community or my colleagues or whomever, to let them know, like, I don't know. And I would never say that before, it was always, I'll figure it out. We're going to do this. We're going to take care of this. We're going to be fine. And it became, I don't know. And I think I'm finally at a place that I'm comfortable saying, I don't know, because I hope we'll figure it out together. Right. So like just being able to step into a space and be honest and also be vulnerable, and therapy helped me learn how to be vulnerable in these situations, because you're the boss and you can't display any weaknesses. And I think in doing that, I'm modeling behavior, not just for my community, but for my staff as well. So for me, it's really just about, okay, Sean, take a step out, center, like show yourself some grace, because I'm incredibly hard with on myself. This was supposed to be open. And now we are not going to be able to do this. And just like, look, chill. Just chill out for a minute. It'll make sense at some point. I'm not sure how, but I know I'm going to keep showing up until we figure out how. And I think just just being honest and saying that to folks and managing your own expectations.
Well, thank you all for those thoughtful responses. I would have to say I certainly agree with everything that you said, because I don't know, that for me personally, these are times that have just induced a level of despair I don't know that I've ever felt in my life. I wake up every morning thinking, what's it going to be today? And I open the paper, and it's the only time that I look at the news during the day. But, we all know how it's been lately. And to think that there is an antidote to despair, for me, that's about my friends and my family. That's about my love for the place I live in and the incredibly fortunate life I have. And most of all, gratitude for a husband who keeps me centered. As someone who he's not an American, he doesn't live in this country, and he has an outsider's perspective that is actually helpful in a way to hear, because it reminds me that our lives here, they're not about national boundaries, and they're certainly not about fascist and repressive and corrupt regimes like we're living in right now. They're about us, and we are about each other. And so I really resonated with everything that the three of you said in that very challenging question. Let's move on to the next one, though, which is for Derek. We are here, Derek, under the banner of the Franklyn Springfield Committee. So can you share a little bit about how the Springfield Awareness Fund is working to support efforts in queer psychology and in overall combating stigma?
I would love to, Doug. So the first, I want to say that the Springfield committee and the fund is really just getting started. But a few of the things that we've already been really working toward, of course, in addition to today's town hall, is one is grants. So we fund research, of course, that is focused on combating stigma in the LGBTQIA community. So that's one that, of course, is really important. Of course, that's what APF is really in the business of doing anyway, is using psychological knowledge to better people's lives overall. And so we certainly are very committed to continuing to do that by funding research. We also have a congressional fellowship that is sponsored by the Springfield Fund. And our current fellow is actually in Senator Duckworth's office. So actually one of my senators here in Illinois. So we do have some really fantastic representation in Congress from the Springfield Committee. And then also kind of a more kind of fun thing is that every year at APA, we have a Springfield happy hour, which I can say last year was a blast in Seattle, and this year will be a blast in Denver. So definitely hope you stop by if you are at convention in Denver this year. And the other really important thing is stay tuned, because like I said, I really think that the committee is really just getting geared up, and especially with the times that we're living in, we see this mission as more important than ever. And we're planning only to increase our footprint and hopefully helping better people's lives from where we are right now.
Thank you, Derek. Before we open up to questions from the audience, we've got one final question for all of you. Where do you find joy right now? And why is it important to do so? I think that's pretty obvious, but where's your joy coming from right now?
Well, like I mentioned before, definitely family from those little ones, my nieces and nephews, is a lot of my joy. Also, knowing the impact that I do have, even though I'm one person, and I know that I have an impact, and I do get joy from that. I get joy from serving my field, from serving psychology, and also, just more personal things. I get joy from going to concerts. I get joy from traveling. I get joy from going to the movies and forgetting briefly what's going on in the world, while I can get lost in another story. So I think there are lots of things. And yes, Doug, you're right. I think the reason it's important to do so is very obvious, so that we can keep on keeping on.
Thanks, Derek.
For me, where I get joy, I'm gonna go back to my wife. 4.5 months pregnant. It's her first pregnancy. We're super excited. So when the world beats me up, I can go in the house and I feel her belly, and oh, he finally moved. Oh my God. And it's the most peaceful thing I've ever experienced in my life. But it also gives me the opportunity to just be normal, right? In a space that tells me that I'm not. So there is the first space of joy, and then music. I love gospel music. Most people don't know that about me. It centers me, it grounds me, and it reminds me of my grandma. So I'll throw on a gospel album in a second. You see how old I am? I'm throwing on albums. I mean, none of that. We're not, yeah, not on Apple Music, and it's an album. But I'll throw on a gospel album in a second, and then just sit and vibe out to it. And then a cigar, so nobody judge me. But but I like a nice cigar. So gospel, cigar, and my wife. Though that's what brings me joy right now.
Hmm. That's great. Thanks, Sean.
I feel like music is probably going to be our common thread. I mean, music and people, right? I also I go to music. I mean, I used to go to more concerts, so I'm a little hemmed in nowadays at home with my little one. But one of the things that brings me joy is I'm usually able to take a break from work and be present to like do lunchtime with my little one. And so I was just going to say this brings me joy when you get a face like that.
Oh,
Yeah. So tropical fruit wasn't bringing him joy, but that face brought me joy. And we always make a point of putting music on for mealtime. Just anything, steel drums. Like I keep transporting us to Hawaii. I mean, I put on reggae, I put on Billie Holiday, and just visiting all these different, just the art, right? It's going back to the art and creativity because that nobody can take that. That's not up for grabs. Like you can get banged up, bruised up, and nobody can take that. So yeah, music, cute faces from my tiny one. And for me, it's the natural world. It really is just, I get a lot of joy from, I don't have any allergies, so caveat, but spring flowers and taking a deep breath and just knowing that, things just keep moving.
great. Thank you. And thank you, all three of you, for those thoughtful responses. And thank you for your time and thoughtful discussion today. I also want to thank very sincerely our great staff at APF who has been working on this afternoon for quite some time now. Jolie and Bethany and our CEO, Michelle Ryder, you really are extraordinary. And I hope you know that. And I hope you know how much all of us appreciate you every day of our lives and the privilege of working with APF as trustees. The remainder of our time now is going to be focused on answering questions from our attendees. Please feel free to send any questions you have using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. So let me start with the first one from our friend Doug Kimmel, who asks, how can this challenge be manifested in the 40th anniversary of Division 44 this year at convention? Any thoughts?
I mean, I always have thoughts. I don't know how good they are. When I saw that question from Doug, I kind of thought, well, Doug, you're also kind of Doug Kimmel, you're kind of the history guru, right? I mean, to me, that would be part of manifesting is revisiting the sort of where we've been and where we're going and what are the times we're in. I think a reflection, but again, I'm a big fan of reflecting on history, not necessarily just for history's sake, but to really pull the resilience out of it, to really borrow from, I mean, we always say we're standing on the shoulders of people, and that's fine. I think we need to remember we're taking their wisdom with us and building on the wisdom. So, I mean, I will say as a proud born and raised Denverite, I'm extremely excited that APA is in my hometown this year. I'm glad to have people here in Colorado, and I'm hoping we can create also an environment here where maybe people do feel like they get a little maybe reprieve to feel held and safe, and then give us an opportunity to celebrate ourselves. I mean, I think that's when you're in the act of defending yourself all the time, sometimes you forget to celebrate.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
I think we need to talk to Division 44 too. You know, we because none of us are you know, like on their board or anything. So I think, you know, it's we certainly could collaborate and try to think of something that we could do in Denver to celebrate the 40th anniversary of 44.
Yeah, I think that's obviously, you know, anything that the division does, we want to coordinate with them if we're going to support and help. And I think that maybe they don't even know that we could partner together or work on a, you know, an event or a project or something. And I really agree with the the point you make, Sarah, about our history, because so many of our younger folks, even in our own community, don't know our history. I was about a month or two ago, I was having a conversation with I was overseas, but I was having a conversation with a young American college student who's studying in France for a year, and I was chatting, and he it was asking me, you know, just tell me about yourself and whatnot, and I said, well, I'm a psychologist, and I became one after I uh, was afraid of losing my job as a gay teacher, and I became friendly with Harvey Milk and all of that. And he said, "Who?" I said, Harvey Milk. Does that name not ring a bell? He said, no. So I said, oh, okay, well, this, as a young gay man, this should be part of your knowledge base. So let me tell you about Harvey. And I did, but it reminded me, like, my God, what else is being lost? You know, maybe, oh, I don't know, you know, the memory of things like the health crisis and how to, you know, how to think responsibly about sex. I don't know, stuff like that. So it's important. I think this history idea. Are there other comments, or should we go to the? Oh, we got a lot of questions coming from the audience. Ready? Okay. This is sort of a long one. It is from an anonymous attendee who says, I do psychological evaluations for teens, with many being autistic and TGD. Many are no longer wanting to include their gender identity in their reports. However, gender dysphoria is sometimes a needed diagnosis whenever people want to have gender-affirming care. I am doing what parents and families want and informing them I will adjust their reports later if they want to address their TGD identities. Are people doing other things to navigate this challenging moment to maintain safety for patients while also trying to support their health holistically? Anyone?
I mean, I can add that I do. Yes, I mean, to answer the question, yes, I would say many of us are doing something similar in practice. I know to some degree, I will say I think this is, again, this is an old playbook that we've been engaging in for a while, which is the balance of, you know, putting name to something like gender dysphoria, where we know it could be used to open a door or it could be used to weaponize. And so, you know, I very often find myself, you know, just doing some education around, like, you know, it's pulling the curtain back, right? It's saying, here's kind of how this works, right? Like, this diagnosis often will open the door to reimbursement from insurance company, and it'll show up like a little code that they can look the code up, and then they'll know it's gender dysphoria. I mean, you know, it's going through and saying, however, if we don't code that, then you may not get the reimbursement, and talking it through, right, without necessarily feeling like you know the right thing to do. I certainly have worked at that intersection of ASD and gender diverse identity quite a bit. And, sometimes what we do is we focus in the report, we just say, I'm going to honor how you would like me to speak about you in this report for the purposes of where this report may go. Mm-hmm. So we talk about who might see it, who might read it. How would you like that to show up? All the while, obviously being very good about honoring whatever we do with this product, essentially, of your assessment doesn't nullify who you are and the journey you're on. So I think, whoever posed the question, being able to offer something like, this is not the be all end all last thing we do, that if we encounter a time and a place where you feel like it would be important to you to have this be visible in your report, we can revisit that. And that's not an inaccurate thing to do. But yeah, I do think it's important just to be really transparent about where things go and honor people's concerns.
Thanks, Sarah. Next question. Hang on. Do you have any tips for someone who stands strong in their religious beliefs, but understands the changes happening in the world, such as the LGBTQ plus / trans community? Whoops, I just lost everything. Hang on. And wants to be in the psychology field. Anyone?
I find I'm overly chatty, which is why I often delay for a moment. So please, we could all also unmute simultaneously and interject. I will disclose I don't have a strong religious conviction, so I'm going to own that up front as I answer the question, because I think that's important. I do have history and religious upbringing and education. I kind of operate, especially in this field, from the standpoint of we don't have to understand or even necessarily feel an alignment with everyone's identity to be respectful and also to do good work. I don't think that understanding is, mandatory to be good to people. And I think, being involved in the psychological field, I will say, I think it's really important that, we each grapple with how we hold our own, identities and convictions, and what our ethics code has to say about the way we operate, and also what the evidence says about human diversity. Mm-hmm. So I don't find working with gender diverse and sexual orientation diverse people to be problematic in any way from the standpoint of what psychology has to say, because psychology reifies that this is a normal, natural variation on human identity. And our ethics code says that we are not to engage in discrimination. And it specifically names our identities as well as others. And so I think that at times, folks do struggle with some tensions between what our ethics code has to say and religious conviction. And that's a hard struggle, and I think that's work that needs to be done. I definitely tell people all the time that when you have two values and they feel like they're in conflict, that's a journey. Like, that's something to endeavor to figure out, like, can I do this work? Can I be in this field and hold these values together? So I know that doesn't maybe get into some very specifics, but those are just some outlined areas that I think about when it comes to human diversity and ethics and good practice.
Thanks, Sarah.
And not that it's necessarily specific to working with the LGBTQ field, but there is a division of APA that is about religious and spiritual issues, Division 36, I believe. And yeah. So there certainly are a lot of psychologists that are addressing this. That they feel that that religion and spirituality more broadly are very much compatible with psychology. And so I would encourage you to look into joining that division, looking into it, because I think that those are conversations that they often have. And as Sarah said, I do think that it is something that everyone has to grapple with, because we have standards of our field, like the ethics code, things like that. But I also don't think that it's categorically incompatible with being in psychology.
Thanks, Derek. Excuse me. This questioner asks, as someone who is not part of the LGBTQIA plus community, how can I, as a psychology trainee, best support queer clients, I'm just going to say that if you don't mind, in therapy and ensure I'm creating an affirming and inclusive space?
I mean, I will say, I think it's important to be visible as inclusive in practice. What that can mean, I mean, from a tangible level, that can mean if you are, you get to a place where you're in practice and you're working for an organization or you're working for yourself and you don't have anything on your website that says you specifically welcome diverse communities and actually is more specific about who you welcome. I think that needs to be there. I don't think it's implied. I don't think it's implied just because we're in the field that that's the case. And I'm drawing on some of the things that Sean said earlier about all the obstacles that can pop up and that people live with in terms of accessing care on so many levels. The last thing people need is, I wonder if I get to the door and I've got enough funds to do it and I found somewhere to go and I decided I want to do some work, I can't wonder if you are somebody I can be with. So I think people need to be prepared to also acknowledge their identity. It's interesting because in my training, I really came out of a psychodynamic background. And so I'm not analytic, but I really came from a place of, less is more sometimes, like don't disclose so much stuff that there's no mystery there. You need some projection. I find there's plenty of projection to be had. I answer the question. If somebody wants to know something about my identity, I'm like, let's talk about that, because what you're probably looking for, especially depending on who you are, is some way to feel like this is going to be bare minimum safe enough to open up, and maybe somebody is hoping to have matched identity. And maybe, sometimes you're going to have someone who says, I really want somebody with lived experience. That's okay. Get your ego out of it for sure. But I think visibility is exceptionally important, especially now.
And I'll just add, making sure that your team also is aligned with creating a safe, affirming space, right? I can't tell you how many times we've had clients come over here, we've sent them somewhere, and the provider was cool, but the receptionist misgendered them, or the security mishandled them in some way. So just making sure that they're all aligned. And going back to Sarah's point, the messaging, not just on your website, but within your space, needs to be affirming and inclusive. Like, I want to walk in and I want to see a Black trans something on your wall, we need to be somewhere so that I know I found my tribe, if you will. Yeah, those would be the things that I add. And sorry, I'm not contributing more, because I'm only a fake doctor. I play a doctor on TV sometimes, so I can't say too much about the other stuff.
Thank you all. Next question is, could you share some insights as clinicians on the systems and barriers you see preventing working class LGBTQ folks from seeking affordable care and finding providers? I imagine predatory insurance companies and practices may play a role, but would love to hear your insight. Or do we have any insights? I know we're almost out of time, so maybe it's a little late in the session.
No, I was just trying desperately not to talk first.
Oh, Sarah.
Hey, in seventh grade, I had my hand up again and again, and I eventually got told to put my hand down. I think that's my little T trauma that I carry around. Um, Gosh, no, I can say this is something, and I will own. I'm in private practice, and in Colorado, it's actually not uncommon for folks not to accept insurance, which just, it's different barriers, right? I mean, acquiring insurance that gives you enough of a network to seek a provider is one thing. And then, in the area I work in sexual orientation and gender diversity, and especially with my intersection with children, actually puts me in a really unique niche. So to me, the answer was help build a clinic, help build a clinic in a hospital. It was, you need to build capacity where the community can go. And can use Medicaid. And I mean, of course, now here we are in this strange new time, but speaking historically, it was looking at how do people access care? How do people tangibly, how can they access care? How can they pay for care? And so, finally, in private practice, I do offer, Sean, you were mentioning sliding scales. Like I had to do some work with myself around my professional ethics, around what was going to be acceptable to me. If I was not going to accept insurance, I needed to find a way to feel like I was ethically aligned with how I feel as a professional. And some of that is also donating time to things like trying to advocate in the field or talking to the people at the insurance division, or sometimes it's not the direct service piece. Sometimes it's looking at the system and trying to change that as well. But it was incumbent upon me to become aware of who in my community was doing therapy and accepting different insurances, in the case that there was somebody where I could help connect them. I consider myself an unofficial referral service. If I'm not the right fit, I don't just say sorry. I go and do some work.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know we still have a couple questions, but unfortunately, we are at the end of our time and we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So I want to thank you again to the panelists and the staff for putting this together, the panelists for sharing your time and expertise, and an enormous thank you to those of you who attended this event today. We are honored to connect and build community with you. And as a psychological community, we are accountable for advocating for the equity, safety, and mental health support for all human beings. APF is proud to leverage psychology and philanthropy to work toward a world where every person can live a life that is happy, healthy, and dignified. We've shared a few resources in the chat for you, and we'll share additional information via email in the coming week. Make sure to follow APF on social media and stay up to date with future events and initiatives. Stay strong, stay connected, and we wish you a great evening.